So up until this point, previously when we're talking about all our risk management considerations and all the details behind risk management, where now we're going to jump and look into our technical considerations as well. So things that we should be considering when we're doing technical implementations as well. So let's begin by talking more around sort of that technical lens, right? So technical implementations and what are some considerations that we need to be worrying about or take into consideration in terms of risk across our technical landscape. So there are definitely risks associated with our technical services and solutions. So anytime we go away and implement technical controls or technical solutions, we're always kind of thinking of our technical services and obviously the solutions that are supporting that, right? So when we're implementing these solutions and the technical requirements in our environment, well, we need to be ensuring that we're testing them out before popping them into production, right? So I'm going to put our testing, right? We want to test it out before any time we go throw something into production. This is very common, right? We want to ensure that our change management cycles are adequate and we're supported through that process. So every time we're dealing with changes in our environment specifically, something even like a small configuration change to maybe an appliance, or maybe we're going into a router, configuring an interface. These things can affect the systems and obviously cause domino effect, affecting the rest of the business, right? So it causes changes, it causes outages, and sometimes it may affect our customer requirements as well through obviously our paying customers. So if we're providing a service and maybe we had a junior log into a switch, maybe configure some BPDU guard on that switch, did something wrong, maybe added a VLAN incorrectly, and then all of a sudden that switch now goes offline, well, chances are it's going to affect something or someone, right? So we want to be very cautious when we're doing any changes across our technical environment, and obviously ensuring that we're managing the risk and limiting the risk as much as possible when we're implementing either new technologies or existing solutions across our environment. So what are some risks associated with our networking services? So we've got networking, which is a main sort of area across our infrastructure. So some common things around networking is having our segmented networks. And we've spoken about segmented networks before in another video. I'm not going to go too much into it in detail this time. But we need to define network segmentation, right? We've got to take our networks and servers and VLANs. And if I've got a bunch of, I'm just going to put a switch here. And this is let's say this is a 24-bit, 24 port switch. You get the math. I'm not going to add the thing there, but that can be just sort of not to scale. And, we've got an access point here, and we may have a laptop over here. And then we've got a desktop, and a server. They all kind of look the same, but you kind of get the idea, right? So this is an access point. This is maybe a workstation of such. This could be a server. This could be a PC. I don't know, I kind of mentioned it in the other way around, but that's okay. Let's just continue on. Maybe we've got some mobile phones. So this could be an iPhone, right? And then we have to go out and obviously segment out these networks and put these in their own sort of, broadcaster network. So we've got to divide all these ports up, and then maybe we've got a printer over here that we need to connect to. I'm just going to write out printer. I'm not going to draw a printer because it's going to look the same as my other drawings. So we have to connect our printers and other devices, right? So across our network, we typically have a bunch of devices, printers, workstations, devices, access points, guests. If we have people connecting in that are maybe third parties, and I'm just going to put out here, maybe we have external people coming in from the business that they need to connect into our switching infrastructure as well, right? So we're going to have to segment that out and ensure that we're putting the right controls around our security. So what is the point of segmenting out our network? Well, the main thing here is when we do segmentation or when we segment out our network, we can implement controls between each of these segments, right? So I can take controls based on, let me just switch colors here, pick a green. We can basically control uh, the resources and who and what's going to be accessing those sort of assets, right? So we can implement those security controls at each segmented component. So then I can go into this switch port, and then I can put an access control list that says, well, the servers in here in VLAN, I'll just put this VLAN 95. Well, they can only talk to the internet, right? And that's how we're going to do it. And then we can specify ports, we can specify protocols that they can use. We can specify, specific destinations or specific source details. So we have the ability to administer each of these components on how they connect in, and even the partners, right? So if we have external people coming into our infrastructure, We want to segment that out and have their own maybe little network that they connect to that just goes purely out to the internet. They don't touch internal resources. And obviously we want to make sure that we can limit and control, essentially controlling our transmission control, right? And transmission control is all about that communication, the ability to control the transmission of that data between devices. So that's pretty much it, right? So anytime we can have an issue or something affects that part of the network. So if all our printers are on one bit of our switch here and something occurs to those printers, well, they're not going to affect, this VLAN 95 because it's its own sort of broadcaster network. It's in its own little private network, right? So we can contain issues as well if machines are affected by malware, or if there's an outbreak of some sort. We can contain certain areas through those segmented networks. So it's the same thing that applies with potential ransomware and obviously downtime and other functions across the business. We can communicate those through obviously our environment. So that's where network segmentation comes into play, and obviously transmission control essentially, and obviously controlling how our data communicates and talks to other things across our infrastructure. So we ultimately want to reduce that risk, and that's where network segmentation comes into play to help us to do that. The other thing here on technical risk and considerations is something around shared credentials. Now, not too long ago, I was working in a law firm, and we had obviously it became my attention as soon as I started, about maybe a couple of days after I had started doing some consulting there, that the users had a single PC, and I just drew a PC here, and we had, not to scale, but we had 10 people, and I'll just draw 3 here, and this is obviously not to scale, and then times that by, whatever, to get 10 people, or plus, plus your 7. Um, So we had the 10 people here essentially that were using a shared account. So they had a, XYZ username and a XYZ password, YZX, the other way around, right? That's the password and that's the username. And we would have each of these 10 users all use that shared account to, go to that machine and log in, right? And that's a big no-no, right? We don't want shared accounts, and I'll explain why. So obviously, I've seen this in a lot of environments and a lot of places, not just this law firm, but typically in some environments where we have shared accounts, maybe a certain department is using a specific credential, and then they're logging in and using that username and account and password, and then obviously they're all logging in with that one account, right? And then you've got a post-it note of the username and password, maybe underneath the monitor. The monitor stand sort of sits like that, and you can look underneath the actual monitor stand. There's a little post-it note that's got the username and password, right? And that's, or anywhere underneath, maybe sometimes it's under the desk, like underneath the actual desk itself, and that little sort of lever above the desk. Other times people put it underneath the chair. You kind of look around in those spots and you kind of find those credentials, and that's something that we don't want, right? So using shared credentials is a big no-no. I'm just going to put here, no, because using shared credentials is an absolute no-no. We shouldn't have that, right? So when multiple people use the same username and password, obviously it's a bad thing, and we don't want that. Now, why is it a bad thing? Let's just say, well, why? Well, I can tell you a couple of things, right? Well, firstly, everybody that's using that workstation is obviously providing a username and password, right? So they're authenticating to the system, yes. Meaning if you don't have the credentials, you can't log in. Okay, that's right. You can't log in unless you have the username and password. Well, it's not easy to find, right? You can look under the monitor, maybe look under the chair, look around the desk, and you may find a credential, but that's true. So the main thing here is we lose our accountability. And here's what I mean by accountability. Um, finish writing the word out. Ability. Okay, that's better. All right, so we lose our accountability. And what I mean by that is if everyone is using a single username and password to log into a system, or maybe multiple systems, in this case, it's a single PC and we have 10 people logging into that machine, then how do we know if we're looking through our logs that something suspicious? Well, then, pretty much how do we know if we're looking through our logging infrastructure, if we're even doing logging, and maybe something is suspicious or we see something suspicious, then how do we know who did something? We don't. So we have a single username or a single account in this instance, and we have 10 people that are potentially doing something that could be either malicious or doing something that's damaging to the business. And we don't have accountability. We can't drill down into and verifying if it's XYZ person, if it's someone else down the line. We don't know that. So we have an account, but we lose the accountability. So, and I mention this because we're in a specific situation with this law firm where people were doing something like embezzlement, and they're taking money out of the account and sort of, selling it at, at a competitor and stuff like that. So you kind of jump into this and you start determining, you know, we don't have visibility and let alone accountability across the infrastructure to determine which specific users made those changes. And that took us some time to sort of drill down and start monitoring those accounts a little bit further to then determine who that person was. But it kind of defeats that purpose. If I have to spend, I'm just going to put a number here and say 7 days. Don't know what happened there, but if I go into 7 days of timing that I've got to go now and actually investigate this issue, well then I can save 7 days into maybe 6 hours if I've got some good logging here that I can then use that with accountability in our logging infrastructure to then monitor these users' accounts. That way we can catch things out very early on and not waste 7 days opposed to something like 6 hours into maybe a normal investigation. So that's something that could affect our environment. So shared credentials, a big no-no across the organization that can affect our technical response and obviously our technical considerations around risk management. And then obviously our network segmentation and network controls as well. So we want to ensure that we're separating our network, we're not using shared credentials, and ensure that we're reducing our risk across our environment, which is the most important and most thing that we should be focused on every single day. I hope you've enjoyed this video. And as always, I'll see you in the next video. And thank you for watching. Bye for now.